The tin I pulled out of the chimney flue weighed almost nothing, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it twice. I was 31 years old, crouched inside a rotting fishing cabin north of Parry Sound, with a flashlight clenched between my teeth and 3 months of unpaid rent sitting in my gut like a poured concrete footing. I had driven 7 hours through October sleet to reach a property my grandfather left me in his will. A property my sister described, in front of the estate lawyer, as structurally compromised and frankly an environmental liability. She was not wrong, but she was wrong about everything else. My grandfather built things, not the way people use that phrase now as a motivational metaphor. He actually built things. He came to Ontario from Newfoundland in 1971 with a journeyman's electrical ticket in his back pocket and $40 in his wallet. And over the next 4 decades he built Caldwell Electrical Services from a single service van firm with 60 employees and a reputation solid enough that every general contractor between Windsor and Sudbury, his name was Alfred. Alfred Caldwell. He smelled like coffee and flux solder and the particular kind of machine oil that gets into a man's hands so deep it never fully washes out. When I was a kid, he'd let me sit on a milk crate in his shop and sort wire nuts by size while he worked. He never said much. He didn't have to. Just being near him felt like standing next to something load-bearing and permanent. My father, his son, had taken the comfortable life my grandfather built and interpreted it as evidence that comfort was a character trait rather than an outcome of labor. He moved into financial planning, married a woman who considered the Granite Club a casual venue, and had 2 children who could not have been more different from each other. My sister is 4 years older than me. She went to Osgoode Hall Law School, articled at a Bay Street firm, made partner before she was 35. She wore Aritzia on weekends and called it dressing down. She knew exactly how to talk to my parents, which restaurants to suggest, which charities to name drop, which of my father's half-formed opinions to agree with at the precise volume required to be noticed across a dinner table. She was, by every measure my parents kept, a success. I was an electrician, a licensed one, nearly through my red seal, but still. To my mother this was something to explain away to her friends with a particular softness. Caleb works in the trades, it's very stable, delivered in the tone of someone describing a manageable medical condition. I had about $18,000 in debt between my truck loan, my tools, and a line of credit that had grown through one bad winter into something I thought about every time I checked my banking app. I was not their version of legacy. The only person who never looked at me like I was a moderate disappointment was my grandfather. He passed on a Wednesday in late September. Pulmonary fibrosis, slow and then suddenly fast. My father handled the arrangements. My sister flew in from Toronto and spent 3 days at the kitchen table with her laptop open, stepping outside periodically for phone calls with an expression of focused efficiency that never quite softened into grief. I drove up from Barrie and mostly stayed out of the way. The will was read at an office in town, in a glass-walled boardroom that smelled like stale drip coffee and printer toner. My grandfather's estate lawyer was a thin man named Mr. Ferguson, who adjusted his reading glasses at the start of each clause with the mechanical calm of someone reading a hydro bill. Caldwell Electrical Services. The company, its equipment, vehicles, and all associated commercial real estate, went to my sister in full. Mr. Ferguson noted it was valued at approximately $4.2 million. My sister nodded. She had already pulled out her phone. The liquid savings, RRSPs, GCs, a brokerage account, went to my parents jointly, totaling just under $900,000. My father made a small, satisfied sound. Then Mr. Ferguson looked up at me. To my grandson Caleb, he read, I leave the deed to the property known as the Caldwell Fishing Property on Unnamed Lake Road, Parry Sound District, Ontario, along with the sum of $2,500 to cover travel and the outstanding property tax balance. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then my sister laughed. It was completely genuine, which was somehow worse. The cabin? He left Caleb the cabin? My mother pressed her fingertips together on the table. Your grandfather had a very deep attachment to that property. It hasn't been used in 15 years, my sister said, leaning forward slightly in her chair with the tone of someone who has just spotted a zoning irregularity. The access road isn't even maintained by the municipality. She looked at me with something between pity and barely restrained amusement. Well, at least you'll have somewhere to practice. I took the envelope with the deed inside, signed where Mr. Ferguson pointed, and drove home through gray drizzle without the radio on. I sat in my truck outside my building for a long time, not going in. My grandfather had built a business worth millions of dollars. He had watched me my whole life, and he had left me a condemned fishing camp on a dirt road in the middle of the Canadian Shield. I told myself I wasn't hurt by it. I was lying to myself. It took me 6 weeks to scrape together the resolve and the gas money to make the drive. By then my landlord had sent a second notice, and the interest on my line of credit had quietly added another $400 to what I owed. I'd emailed 2 real estate agents about the cabin, and neither had called back, which told me most of what I needed to know about the property's market appeal. I decided I would go up, assess the structural damage, document it properly, and try to sell the land to some developer or hunting outfitter for whatever I could get. The drive took nearly 3 hours after Barrie, on roads that became progressively more hostile. The last 12 kilometers were gravel, then packed dirt, then 2-wheel ruts through second-growth bush so dense my headlights barely reached the tree line on either side. When I finally pulled into the overgrown clearing, the full reality of my inheritance hit me like I'd walked into a door I hadn't seen. The cabin was worse than I'd pictured. The roof had buckled across its midspan, probably from ice damming that had gone unaddressed for years. A section above the rear bedroom had partially collapsed inward. The front porch had rotted nearly all the way through. I tested each board with my boot before trusting it with my weight. The windows were opaque with oxidized grime. It didn't look like a real estate asset. It looked like a liability with walls. I muttered something my grandfather would have raised an eyebrow at, and got to work. I had brought my sleeping bag, a propane camp stove, a cooler, and my full toolkit. I started by assessing the structural situation and bracing the ceiling joists in the main room before one of them let go entirely. The isolation was total. No cell service, no sound except wind through the Douglas firs and the occasional crack of a dead branch somewhere in the bush. By the second evening, the silence had weight. On the third afternoon, I turned my attention to the stone fireplace. It was the best thing in the cabin by a significant margin. Local granite, properly mortared, the kind of work that outlasts the people who build it. The chimney was packed with 15 years of debris. Nesting material, a long dead squirrel, decomposed leaves compressed into layers. I was clearing it with a steel rod when it caught on something solid. I shone my flashlight up the flue. One of the granite stones near the smoke shelf was sitting wrong, too far forward, not flush with the ones around it. I worked my fingers around its edges, rocked it loose. 15 pounds of stone, maybe, and behind it was a hollow roughly the size of a shoebox. Inside was a metal Christmas biscuit tin with a poinsettia on the lid. Sealed around the rim with Scotch 33 electrical tape, the good stuff, the brand my grandfather always kept clipped to his belt. My hands weren't completely steady when I peeled it open. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag and then a square of oilskin, was a composition notebook. His initials were marked on the cover in black marker, AC. I sat down on my sleeping bag, turned on my headlamp and started reading. The first half was what it looked like, a fishing log. Dates, water temperatures, notes on what lures worked on which lakes, occasional observations about the drive or the weather. His handwriting was cramped and deliberate, the writing of someone who learned penmanship before schools stopped insisting on it. Then, somewhere around the middle, the entries changed. March 4th. Had Robert over for dinner. He mentioned that Simone has been drawing on the company's operating line to fund her own investment account. Called it a bridge loan, said it with a straight face. She's been doing it for at least 2 years. Robert knows. He thinks I don't read the quarterlies anymore. I read everything. I turned the page. June 17th. Confirmed it with my accountant. She's restructured how the company accounts for subcontractor payments. The HST remittances are being delayed, and the cash gap is being used to float her personal accounts. It's not accidental. It's a system. She built it deliberately over time. I'll give her that much. I sat back and stared at the page. My sister had been running a tax float scheme through my grandfather's company, and my grandfather had known about it for years. August 22nd. I will not confront them directly. Confrontation gives them time to bury it deeper. I am also not a well man, and I have learned not to spend what energy I have on things I cannot immediately use. What I can do is protect what matters. Paper money is a promise, and I have learned not to trust promises from people who have already broken them quietly. I have been converting assets for 2 years. The cabin is the right place. No one goes there but me. Caleb would go there. Caleb knows how to do the work. The final entry was 2 months before he died. The handwriting was slower, more careful, like he was spending something. October 3rd. I am tired now, but the arrangement is complete. Caleb, if you are reading this, you went to the cabin. You found the tin. You did the work. That is all I ever needed to know about a man. Look under the hearth, at the place where the frost doesn't reach. What's there belongs to you. Don't let them make you feel small. You never were. I put the notebook down on the sleeping bag and looked at the fireplace for a long time. Then I heard tires on gravel outside. I tucked the notebook away, killed my headlamp, and waited by the window. A silver Audi Q5 had pulled into the clearing. A man in his 50s climbed out. Waterproof jacket, clean hiking boots with no trail wear on them, the posture of someone whose job involves presenting things attractively. He walked toward the porch. I opened the door before he reached it. He introduced himself as Morton. He represented a development group, he said, that had been quietly acquiring land in the area for a recreational property project. The Caldwell property was an ideal fit. He was prepared to offer $60,000 for the deed, right now, cash transaction, documents ready within 48 hours. The property had been assessed at $38,000. I'll think about it, I said. He smiled in a way that involved only the lower half of his face. Don't wait too long. These things have timelines. He handed me a business card with a Toronto area code and no company name on it. I watched his Audi back out of the clearing and stood on the porch until I couldn't hear him anymore. Then I went back inside and found my pry bar. My grandfather had built the hearth on a raised timber frame, slate laid over it in interlocking sections. The underside, the space between the stone platform and the subfloor below, had been spray foamed after the fact, deliberately, in a way that wasn't original to the cabin's construction. The center section was secured with lag bolts into a hidden steel frame. When I drove them out with my impact driver, the slate lifted as a single hinged panel, pivoting on a concealed piano hinge at the back wall. Below was a root cellar, properly excavated, concrete block walls, poured floor. A pressure-treated ladder went down into it. The air that came up was cold and completely clean, sealed, dry, undisturbed for years. I climbed down with my flashlight. Against the back wall, on a low wooden shelf, sat 3 military surplus ammunition canisters. Heavy steel, olive green, rubber gasketed lids. Beside them, a locked steel document box. I opened the first canister. Nested in custom-cut foam were rows of gold coins. Royal Canadian Mint maple leafs, 1 troy ounce each, individually sleeved in plastic. I picked one up, the weight of it, that specific immediate density landed in my palm like a fact. The second canister matched the first. The third held silver, larger rounds and a row of 100-ounce bars wrapped in cloth. I found the key to the document box taped to the underside of the middle canister and opened it. Inside were purchase receipts going back 4 years, a handwritten ledger, and a sealed envelope with my name on it in my grandfather's handwriting. I sat on the cold concrete floor and read the letter. He wrote that he had been converting personal post-tax savings into physical precious metals for 4 years, using 3 different coin dealers across Ontario so that no single transaction drew attention. That the gold and silver in the 3 canisters represented approximately $2.3 million Canadian dollars at the prices he'd paid. That the current market value would be somewhat higher. He wrote that he had known for some time that my sister was not who she presented herself to be, and that my father had been too close to her and too invested in her success to see it clearly. He wrote that the company she was inheriting was carrying more exposure than anyone on the outside could see, and that, without his personal lines of credit backstopping the corporate accounts, the CRA audit he expected within 18 months would find things that couldn't be explained away. Then he wrote, "I left her what she wanted. I left you what will last." And below his signature, one more line. "You always knew the difference between a load-bearing wall and a decorative one. So did I. That's why I trusted you with the real foundation." I was still sitting on the concrete floor when I heard the front door of the cabin open above me. I killed the flashlight. 2 sets of footsteps crossed the main room. They stopped directly over the open hatch. "Caleb." My sister's voice controlled the boardroom register. "I can see your sleeping bag. I know you're down there." I said nothing. "Morton called me," she said. "I'm not here to fight. Whatever Grandpa hid down there, it was accumulated using assets connected to the company. That makes it a corporate asset, which means it falls under the estate I inherited. I have a solicitor ready to file Monday morning, and I have CRA contacts who will make your next several years very unpleasant if you want to go that route." A second voice, male low, something I couldn't make out. "Give him a minute," my sister said. I sat in the dark and let those minutes pass. I thought about every dinner where they'd changed the subject when I walked in. Every holiday where my sister's latest case or promotion got the champagne toast, and my apprenticeship got a polite nod across the table. I thought about my grandfather sitting on a milk crate in my shop 4 years ago, watching me rough in a panel, not saying anything, just being there the way load-bearing things are there. Then I climbed the ladder. My sister was standing in the middle of the cabin in a Helly Hansen, down vest and hiking pants that still had the fold creases from the store. Behind her, positioned between me and the door in a way that wasn't quite accidental, was a man in his mid-40s, with the build of someone who'd played junior hockey and kept the frame. My sister looked at the open hatch and then at me with the expression she used on clients who were being unreasonable. "Let's be sensible," she said. "It's mine," I said. "The deed is in my name, the property and everything on it." That's a simplified reading of estate law. He wrote a letter. It's specific about intent. His accountant has records going back 4 years. Every purchase came from his personal post-tax accounts, nothing from the company. Something shifted behind her eyes. She hadn't known about the accountant or the paper trail. "This is not the place to work this out," she said, more carefully now. "You're right," I said. "The OPP can take the statements." "Caleb, don't make this bigger than it needs to be. You drove 4 hours to my property without any notice or permission," I said. "Your associate there is standing between me and my door. You've made a claim against my inheritance in front of a witness. I'm calling the Ontario Provincial Police and giving them that exact summary, and they can decide what to do with it." The man behind her said her name. She didn't look at him. She was a lawyer. She understood exactly what I was about to create: a documented record, statements on file, her presence at the scene and her associate's presence, and her verbal claim against the estate, all of it sitting in an OPP file where it would be very difficult to make disappear before a judge. She made a decision. I watched her make it. "We're leaving," she said to the man, and then to me quietly, "This isn't finished." "No," I said, "it isn't." I listened to the Audi back down the access road and stood in the doorway until the sound of the engine was gone completely. Then I climbed back down into the cellar, sat next to the 3 canisters for a while without doing anything in particular. and breathed the cold, clean air. Then I climbed back up, secured the hatch with my body weight, and called 911 on the faint half-bar of cell signal I could get from the porch with my arm raised. I told the dispatcher that 2 individuals had entered my property without permission and made verbal threats related to a disputed estate asset. The Parry Sound OPP detachment sent a cruiser within the hour. I gave my statement, showed them the deed, showed them my grandfather's letter. The officer photographed the hatch and the cellar, noted the canisters, confirmed I was within my rights to restrict access to the property while the estate matter was being legally resolved. He took the names I gave him and wrote them down carefully. The court process took months, but it was less complicated than my sister had predicted when she left. My grandfather's accountant confirmed the purchase history cleanly, every coin traced to personal funds, post-tax, properly documented. Baker Tilly, the accounting firm I retained using the first 10 maple leafs I converted at a dealer in Barrie, produced a chain of custody the estate solicitor filed with the Ontario Superior Court, without needing to elaborate much. My sister's legal team argued that the gold constituted an undisclosed estate asset subject to redistribution. The court did not agree. The property was mine. What was in it was mine. The letter confirmed intent. The records confirmed legality. But my grandfather had left me more than the cellar. The composition notebook I found in the fireplace contained enough detail about the HST remittance manipulation to give the Canada Revenue Agency a very specific place to start. My solicitor made the referral. The audit notice arrived at Caldwell Electrical Services, her company now, 4 months after the estate was settled. What the auditors found was not a minor discrepancy. My sister had been running delayed HST remittances as a short-term liquidity mechanism for her personal investment accounts. A system she'd built carefully over 3 years into something that was nearly invisible in the books. Nearly. The CRA did not share her assessment of how invisible it was. The Ontario Securities Commission developed a separate interest in how she had capitalized a private real estate partnership using funds she had no documented authority to move. I followed the news from the cabin on my laptop, a mug of coffee going cold beside me, the November bush completely silent outside the window. The coverage was not extensive. Financial fraud rarely gets the same attention as other crimes. But what there was of it was specific. My sister had retained defense counsel. The company was under court-supervised accounting. 2 of her major clients had already moved their retainers. My parents called 8 days after the first article ran. My father, not my mother. That surprised me. He sounded smaller on the phone than I'd heard him in years. He said he hadn't known the full extent of what my sister had been doing. He said that their retirement savings had been rolled into a private investment vehicle she managed on their behalf, and that things were now, financially, very difficult. He used the word family twice in the first 90 seconds of the call. I stood in the kitchen of the repaired cabin and looked out at the bare birch trees along the lakeshore and listened. "I know you're in a hard spot," I said. "I'm sorry for that part. We need some help, Caleb, whatever Alfred left you." "He left it to me specifically," I said, "because he thought carefully about who would use it right. He left you $900,000 and he left her a company, and that was his decision. What happened after that wasn't mine to prevent." My father was quiet. "Get independent legal advice," I said, "separate from anything connected to her. That's the most useful thing I can tell you." I said goodbye and set the phone down on the counter. They didn't call again after that. I am sitting on the rebuilt porch now, 2 years out from that November, and the cabin is nearly unrecognizable as the structure I first pulled into that gray October afternoon. I spent 14 months on the restoration, working weekends and every stretch of days I could manage between jobs, and then another 4 months on the addition. The original footprint is all still there. The granite fireplace, the cellar below the hearth, now climate-controlled and properly ventilated and secured with a commercial-grade lock I installed myself. The addition doubled the usable space. Timber frame construction, triple pane glass facing the lake, in-floor hydronic, heating off a propane boiler in the new utility room. It is the best electrical work I have ever done on any job, for anyone. I did not stop working. I sat my Red Seal exam and passed it, and 6 months after the estate was settled, I had enough working capital to start Caldwell and Son Electrical out of Barrie. We run 4 crews now. Everyone on those crews is a licensed journeyman or a fourth-year apprentice. Everyone earns above scale, and everyone has a pension plan that is administered properly and touched by nobody. I check it personally. Every quarter. The gold is still mostly in the cellar below the hearth, the way my grandfather left it. Quiet, patient, real. I convert what I need when I need it. The rest stays. My sister wanted the company because she understood the kind of wealth that comes with a title and a Bay Street address and the right introductions to the right people at the right club. She understood paper wealth, accounts and leverage ratios and valuations that can be restructured, hidden, moved, and as it turned out, lost. My grandfather understood something else. The kind that sits in the ground. The kind you find when you do the work nobody expected you to do, in a place nobody thought was worth the drive. The kind that holds its value because it has actual weight. He gave me a rotting cabin and a note that said, "Go there and do the work." That was the whole inheritance, really. The rest was just what was already there.